I think entrepreneurship gets talked about in extremes. Either it's super glamorized and it's all about freedom and flexibility, or it's framed as a continuous struggle. I believe the reality is actually quieter than that. Yes, building is extremely demanding, but not always in the obvious ways. It's actually the responsibility, the uncertainty, and the fact that decisions stay with you for a very long time and you struggle to really switch off. Now, I've been building for multiple years now, and I wanted to share a few lessons that I believe only really show up when you're really in the weeds. That really show up once you're up, running, and close to execution. And when you're up, running, and executing daily. Not advice, just lived perspective from my experience. For context, my name's Shuel. I'm a Cambridge and Harvard grad, entrepreneur, and investor. And over the last few years, I founded and scaled a family investment office called Ahmed Capital Group, focused on real estate, healthcare ventures, and other investments. That meant accountability for everything: strategy, fundraising, capital allocation, portfolio performance, managing a team. Through that process, I built a multidisciplinary team from across finance, operations, brokerage, legal, and everything else in between, and grew the portfolio from zero to a multi-seven-figure portfolio. And with that, working with investors from across the US, Europe, Asia, and Australia. None of that happened in a straight line, and that's where these lessons have come from. So lesson one, and probably one of the most important: speed matters. The first thing entrepreneurship teaches you is the importance of speed. Now, not doing reckless things, but just the speed of learning and applying. When you're building, if you're waiting for the perfect amount of information and the perfect amount of time, that can become very, very expensive. Markets move, financing conditions move, and investment opportunities, especially the best ones, they are not going to be waiting for you forever. Now, in our case, that showed up very early on in some of our investment decisions. There were moments where we had good enough information to execute on an investment, but not enough to feel 100% comfortable. Waiting would have meant losing momentum, or in some cases, losing the deals entirely. Now, there has been points in our investment history where we had to decide whether to move forward on a real estate asset, as an example, knowing that we didn't have 100% clear strategy on exit when we were negotiating going into the asset. So the information that we have was not perfect, but at that point, it was good enough to act on making a decision to acquire these real estate assets. And once we acted quickly and made the decision, acting quickly gave us feedback we would never have learned if we were still sitting on the sidelines. So what I've learned is speed creates feedback, and feedback gives you clarity. So you can refine once you're moving, but if you're staying still, that indecision can ultimately come back to haunt you. Lesson number two: failure is a feature. Now, this second lesson is one that I believe people can understand intellectually, but you can struggle with emotionally. Failure is not an exception in entrepreneurship. It's literally part of the job. When you're allocating capital or testing operating models or working with partners or trying to figure out if this person is the right person to hire, some assumptions by default will be wrong. It's unavoidable to make no mistakes in all of that process. Now, we've had initiatives that on paper look like a no-brainer project to go ahead with. Commercially, it made sense. Financially, the numbers all stacked up. But then the closer we got to signing on the dotted line, something just did not feel right. In one case, one of the investment decisions, the structure made sense in theory, but once it met real operating conditions, the friction became a bit too obvious. And the mistake wasn't the initial decision. The mistake would have been pretending that everything was working when it clearly wasn't. And ultimately, entrepreneurship teaches you to separate your ego from the evidence. And failure and lessons and mistakes that you go through, if you process them really honestly, then it sharpens your judgment and gives you even more information to use for your next decision. And ultimately, that judgment and decision making is one of the most valuable assets that I believe any founder can create when they're in entrepreneurship. Now, the next lesson was just a reminder how the hiring process and who you hire changes everything. So this lesson is all about people. Hiring, from my experience in large corporate and in my own company, is a very hard thing to do extremely well, and far more important than people come to expect. Early on, you might think skills and experience set is the most important thing, but then over time, you realize how important alignment and culture can play in who you recruit. And then ultimately, having that alignment can make or break any hire that you have coming into your business, whether it's a large company or a small or medium-sized enterprise. That alignment on values between each other, how you both decide and make judgment on things as well, how also people react when things go wrong or priorities aren't aligned also. When you're operating across multiple stakeholders, whether it's investors, lenders, operating partners, one misaligned hire or third party that you've recruited can slow everything down. And those bad experiences fundamentally change how you think about hiring moving forward. And now I spend less time on technical perfection and expertise and more time on how someone thinks, how they communicate, and then what is the process in which they make a decision. So everyone can talk a big game about what their strategy is, etc., and what they're trying to do. But ultimately, your team is your strategy, because they're not only executing on it, but they are the ones delivering it. So they essentially are your strategy. So hire wisely, take your time, and do it as good as you can. And if you've made a mistake, then quickly correct it. Now, the next lesson is more personal, and that's the realization that no one will fully understand what you're going through. This is something that entrepreneurship teaches you quietly, and that is that everyone around you will not understand what you do. Now, from the outside, building an investment platform, in my case, can look abstract to some people. People see the outcomes, the asset size, the developments, the growth, the awards, but they don't see the trade-offs underneath. The responsibility of managing capital, the weight and outcomes of these long-term decisions and strategic decisions that you're making, and the fact that mistakes, if they're not corrected very quickly, can compound. Now, some may question the risk, some may worry about what would happen if things go wrong, and other people may choose a more safe and predictable path. But at some point, you realize that expectation and validation are not the same thing. You don't need everyone to agree, and you don't need everyone to understand. You just need to be comfortable in your own decision making and the path that you're trying to create for yourself. So entrepreneurship becomes much lighter when you don't require the permission of people around you. So now the next lesson, this is the final one. This is a realization that I believe there are more downs than ups in entrepreneurship. Progress in this game is rarely linear. There are periods of time where it feels like some days everything that could go wrong is going wrong and nothing is moving forward. Days where deals take longer to complete, capital takes longer to be released, or external conditions shift and markets look like they're going to turn. Now, in our case, growing responsibly is the number one priority. So that means applying commercial discipline, financial rigor, and risk management, even when other paths of growth can look like they're going to be even faster if we moved quicker. Sometimes the work is saying no to the fast thing, and the value is created in having patience in the decision. And sometimes when you're having those bad days where every phone call or email that you receive is another problem, then you just have to be patient, recognize it as part of playing the game, go to sleep and recognize tomorrow will be a new day and a new set of opportunities. And when that eventual up day comes, then it will feel so sweet that it will erase all the downs that you had to go through to get to that point. So after all those lessons, you may have the question, okay, so why would anyone want to do it anyway? Why would anyone want to go into entrepreneurship? Because ultimately for me, entrepreneurship gives you ownership in the most deepest sense. Ownership of decisions, ownership of trade-off, and ownership of outcomes. It really sharpens your judgment and decision-making skills. It builds a lot of self-trust and self-confidence, and it accelerates growth in a way that many other paths just cannot compete with. Now, entrepreneurship is not for everyone, but if you do it consciously and you recognize the trade-offs that you're making, it can be extremely meaningful. Now, not because it's easy, but because it changes how you think, how you decide, and how you ultimately show up as an individual and as a leader. So if you're building right now, I recommend to just keep going. And if you're thinking about it, choose deliberately. Now, it's been almost 12 years since I invested in my first real estate asset back in 2014. And now that we're 12 years later and being able to work on the business at a more intense full-time process in recent years, I am so glad that I took that decision to start the business. I'm so glad that I went through all the challenging times that we've gone through. I'm so glad that I made the mistakes that I made, because now 12 years later, I have flexibility and freedom and stability and relationships and partnerships I would never have dreamed of if I did not start. And at that point, I could have read all the textbooks, looked through all the notes, listened to all the podcasts, but nothing will be getting into the game and learning these lessons as you go on. I hope this video has been useful for you. Thank you for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.